welcome and thank you for joining Tzedek Chicago to honor Torture Awareness Month by learning together how members of Tzedek Chicago are already working to address carcerality with a focus on what I call everyday torture in U.S. domestic prisons. I am Virginia Avniel Spatz, a Tzedek member who helped put this program together. Very shortly, we're going to hear from a number of different members of the congregation engaged in exciting efforts in the Chicago area and around the country. So Tzedek has members and participants all over the world, and I do want to just issue a special welcome to those who might be tuning in asynchronously because it's the middle of the night right now. Wherever they are, we're glad that you're joining us too. And another word about our far-flung membership. Several organizations and efforts highlighted tonight are local to Chicago. And it's always a kind of a tension with Tzedek Chicago, how much is Chicago and how much is international. And we realize that many members are not in the Chicago area, maybe have never even visited Chicago, but we're hoping this program will allow all of us to learn more about what's happening in Tzedek's home city and become better connected to what goes on in Chicago. And also we figured that the issues that are being raised are probably common ones, whether you're in Chicago or not. So I do want to mention a few things about what is sort of not happening tonight, because I do want to point out that our advanced publicity talked a lot about Palestine, and we're not going to have as much time as we might have planned for that. We'll just have to have another event that focuses on that. And early publicity also specifically mentioned that there was going to be a letter writing activity, and that will also have to be another night. I do want to not just dismiss the issue of Palestine entirely and mention that one resource I highly recommend is Dr. Brittany Friedman's recent book, Carceral Apartheid: How Lies and White Supremacists Run Our Prisons. It's in this Proton drive. I put a number of things in this drive to share tonight, and you should be able to download them. Right, great. So I was mentioning Brittany Friedman's book, Carceral Apartheid: How Lies and White Supremacists Run Our Prisons. And I think she does a really powerful job of relating what she calls carceral apartheid, how that works in the US, in Palestine, and elsewhere around the world. So I recommend checking out those excerpts and also checking out her book if you can. Also, there's lots of things that I wrote because that's just how I think. So there's this drive is full of words. You can read them or not. And in there is a link to Adamir Prison Support and Human Rights Association, which just published a report on Palestinian prisoners and how they're being treated, which highlights things that are in common with US prisons and some things that are different. And also in those materials is one page about the UN Convention Against Torture, which is the reason for Torture Awareness Month, and a brief set of notes about some Jewish and interfaith organizational responses in the past and some present things. There's also links to find more through various internet links. And what I've been calling everyday torture, I kind of figured that nobody on this call needs to be convinced that US prisons are torturing our friends and neighbors. But I did include some things in those materials for you to use if you're talking to other people who might have questions about whether what is happening is legally torture, and if and how the specific expression used changes our response to that. So before moving into the brief text study that I want to start out with, I'll close this section of remarks by saying that at first, those of us who put this together, thought this was going to be a one-time thing for Torture Awareness Month. But every conversation that we've had has made it more and more obvious that we need to talk about these issues in other ways and make other connections. And we're just, this will probably end up being one of many further conversations in one way or another. So I really hope I'm not, like, I feel like I'm talking a mile a minute, and I hope everybody can get something, even if I'm talking too fast. But I did want to do this very brief text, just framing before we begin inviting our members to present about their own work. And it's just one paragraph from the Babylonian Talmud Brachot 5b. So we have here one brief passage from Brachot, and I wanted to bring this to help us frame our conversation tonight. And as is kind of tzedek practice, I'll ask if somebody feels willing to come off mute and just read the English on the screen, starting with Rabbi Chia Bar Abba. Do we have a volunteer?
I can, if folks can hear me. Great. Rabbi Hia Bar Abba fell ill. Rabbi Yohanan entered to visit him and said to him, "Is your suffering dear to you?" Rabbi Hia said to him, "I welcome neither this suffering nor its reward." Rabbi Yohanan said to him, "Give me your hand." Rabbi Hia Bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yohanan stood him up, or raised him. Rabbi Yohanan fell ill. Rabbi Hanina entered to visit him and said to him, "Is your suffering dear to you?" Rabbi Yohanan said to him, "Neither this nor its reward." Rabbi Hanina said to him, "Give me your hand." He gave him his hand, and Rabbi Hanina stood him up. Why didn't Rabbi Yohanan stand up himself? They say a prisoner cannot free himself from prison.
Okay, thank you very much. So I had hoped that we would, maybe have time for text study, but I think we're going to have to do that on another night as well. I did want to bring this text, though, and hope that you'll keep it in mind and that maybe it will raise some questions as we hear from our various presenters about the relationship between healing and release from prison, about what is our responsibility for helping others obtain release, and about what shifts in our thinking might be required for us to figure out where we can and should extend our hands and where we might need a hand extended to us in order to get ourselves out of whatever circumstances we're in that we need to get out of. And I'm just going to scroll real fast down here. Look away if you don't deal well with scrolling. There's a couple of footnotes here. If you are able to open the document yourself, you can read those later. And I hope when we get to our discussion period, if people have thoughts about this, hold on to them, and we can have those when we hit our discussion period. But with that, I did want to just start with a little bit of text, and then I will turn it over to Brant, who's going to introduce our first couple of speakers. And let me stop sharing, and I will trust that Brant will take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Virginia. And thank you all for being here. And especially thank you to our tzedek members who have agreed to be here. It's a very busy time for all of us, certainly for all of them in the work that you're doing. And so we really do appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences and your wisdom with us. So our speakers are all tzedek Chicago members. They're all involved in justice-based, anti-carceral abolitionist work. And my job is really just to introduce them to you one by one. So our first speaker is Bex Rosinski, who is a SEDEC member and also a board member. Beck is the co-founder and community engagement and program director at the Migrant Support Collective. Beck.
Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. And thank you, Brant, for the introduction. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here tonight. And thank you to the people who put this together, this really great event. Very grateful to be invited, very honored to be invited to speak. So like Brant said, I'm here from Migrant Support Collective. Migrant Support Collective is a nationwide organization. We are a fiscally sponsored project of OCAD, who those of you in Chicago might be familiar with OCAD, Organized Communities Against Deportations. So we provide services that support the well-being of detained migrants throughout the entire country. We provide direct social services, and we also are planning some advocacy efforts. So the approach that we take is basically like the social services put out the fire, and the advocacy work addresses the source of the flames. And so the direct services also act as a way to ensure that people's involvement in our advocacy efforts are reciprocal, that people are really gifting us with the knowledge of their experiences being incarcerated. And so we want to make sure that we also provide them with the services that we can give to them. So a little bit about how we got started. There's just three of us. So we were all formal legal aid workers. One of the other folks who I work with, we've worked together for many years in other organizations as well. And the way that we started Migrant Support Collective is because we were providing legal aid to queer asylum seekers who were detained. And we started talking amongst all of ourselves as coworkers and realized that we were all using our personal money to send commissary funds to people or to buy books or journals for our clients. And we were working at a nonprofit and not making a ton of money. And obviously, it quickly got to a point where it was not financially sustainable for us to continue doing that. So we started what we thought would be a small GoFundMe, and it got a lot more interest than we anticipated. So we started just as providing books and journals and anything that a library would provide really for detained queer migrants in the Midwest. And then we started getting requests from all over the country. And so we opened it up to anyone who is detained by ICE in the United States. The other thing that we discovered is that there are a lot of really, really great programs for sending books to people who are incarcerated under the Federal Bureau of Prisons, but there aren't really that many for people who are detained by ICE. And I think that it's because it is just so much more complicated to send things to people who are in ICE detention centers. Like there's so much red tape. For instance, we can't send people used books. We have to buy new books, and they have to arrive in the package from the publisher. And even then, sometimes detention centers turn them away for various reasons. So the entire structure of our programs has to be tailored specifically to ICE detention centers, because the really important programs that exist for other types of prisons just don't work with the regulations that you have to abide by with ICE detention. So we provide services and advocacy efforts for migrants of any sexual orientation and gender identity throughout the nation. We do focus mostly on queer migrants. Part of that is because most of us who are part of the organization are queer, and so our social circles were like, that was where we were plugged in. And part of it is also because we sort of by nature started as like plugging in where there were no resources, and we've sort of just kept using that model. And unsurprisingly, what we discovered is that the biggest population that has a lack of resources are transgender detained migrants. So Um, the work that I do specifically with MSC, I do the direct services. So mental health support, our library program, which is sort of like our bread and butter at this point. And we're also starting up a pen pal program. And then I also lead our development work. So I've learned grant writing, which was not a journey I ever envisioned for myself, but I'm here. And then one of my other colleagues does our advocacy work. So we have a data transparency project, just trying to raise awareness around the realities of what it is like to be detained. And that data includes not just quantitative data about detention numbers, but also qualitative data about the realities of what it is like to be detained, particularly as a queer migrant. And then our other colleague does our creative programming, and that includes an art as advocacy program that is forthcoming, where there will be sort of this asynchronous art program done by folks at different detention centers that results in a collective exhibition. And then yeah, just to answer the final question that was asked of us, which is why we personally have chosen to take on this specific issue. The reason that I got involved in immigration work to begin with is because, like many Jews and like many people on this call, I'm sure my own family has a very trauma-ridden and complicated immigration history. And I remember as a kid, one of my like earliest memories is thinking about as a kid, like, why wasn't my whole family allowed to come to the United States? And the answer was like, because of systemic discrimination, because they were not welcome in the United States. And we don't know what happened to most of our family members. And so as I grew up and learned more about what the realities of the world are like now, it became pretty clear that the same xenophobia and discrimination that we're seeing today is exactly what has always happened throughout history, including to my own family. And so just seeing those same patterns of persecution against modern day immigrant communities is devastating. And so yeah, that's why I decided to get involved in immigration work, and then got involved in social services because as a legal aid worker, I sort of became disillusioned with the legal system and realized that it almost never really results in justice for people. So social services was sort of a place to plug in that filled my cup personally more. Yeah, so I unfortunately have to run. I would have loved to stay for the whole event because so many people on this call have such amazing things to share. But thank you for listening to me, and I will go ahead and share my email in the chat in case anyone has questions. And yeah, thank you so much. And back to you, Brant.
Thanks, Beck. Thanks so much. Yeah, and if folks have questions for Beck, feel free to put them in the chat or to contact Beck directly. So, all right, moving right along. Our next speaker will be Joey Mogul. And Joey is a tzedek member, co-founder and board president of Chicago Torture Justice Memorials Foundation, and the co-founder and board member of the Chicago Torture Justice Center. So, yeah, welcome, Joey. So great to have you. I'll turn things over to Joey now.
Wow, thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here. I just want to, first of all, say how much I love Tzedek as a congregation and how much I just love you as a community. You are life-giving and life-saving to so many, but particularly me personally, as someone who is in constant need of being in an anti-Zionist Jewish community. And I love coming to Temple, and I don't come to it enough, but I come here and I see all these amazing organizers and educators, and it's just such a beautiful room to be in. And so I'm also just grateful for so many people's work. Rabbi Rosen, you're my leader, but I also have to shout out Maya Schwanwar. You are just one of my abolitionist goddesses. So, and I learned so much from you. I'm going to keep this brief, but I'm going to also, little trigger warning, we are talking about torture, and so I want to talk about it a little bit. So I've had the honor and privilege of both representing as a lawyer, working as an organizer, and counting as friends several people who were tortured by Chicago police officers. And there was a particular pattern and practice of racist torture committed by a former Chicago police commander, John Burge, and the henchmen under his command at 2 police area headquarters on the south side of Chicago. And this pattern and practice of torture went from 1972 to 1991. And when we say torture, we're not being flippant, we're not exaggerating. Individuals were electrically shocked with what was known as an electric shock box based on the field Tucker telephone used in the Vietnam War. And John Burge was a military police officer in the Vietnam War before joining the Chicago Police Department. So I want to make those connections between the military and the police here in the US. And as we know, there are connections between the police here in the US and Israeli forces as well. So John Burge and used this electric shock box. Other individuals were shocked with cattle prods. Many individuals were suffocated with typewriter covers, and they were then kicked or punched in the stomach or chest, forcing them to breathe out and then breathe the bag in. Others were subjected to beatings with rubber blackjacks, all devices to inflict serious pain without leaving marks. Others were, almost every single of the people tortured, Black men and women, were tormented with racist epithets and racist slurs, and as a way to dehumanize them and break their wills in order that they gave confessions. And those confessions were then used to secure convictions, and in the case of 11, send them to Illinois' death row. And I want to be clear, some individuals confess to some violent acts that they may have committed or that they did commit, while others were forced to confess to things they did not commit. But regardless, whether they did anything or not, they never, ever should have been tortured. And so there's been a struggle for justice that has gone on for 60 years from the moment the torture survivors cried out and tried to speak their truths. And they were often disbelieved, dismissed, and disregarded by the courts, by the prosecutors, and by local officials. And in some cases, by family members and by their own lawyers. So they would challenge their confessions in their criminal cases. They would have those confessions, they would try to suppress them. Those motions to suppress were denied. The confessions were used against them. So there's been, I can't go through it all because we're talking about 60 years of struggle, but there was a campaign to get John Burge fired from the Chicago Police Department in the 90s. Fortunately, that succeeded after litigation exposed this pattern of practice of torture. But I want to be clear, the courts never were going to provide true justice, but they were tools that were used by lawyers to kind of unearth the evidence. So the first campaign was to get Burge fired from the Chicago Police Department in the 90s. That was successful. There was then a campaign around the torture survivors who were on death row. It was organized by the death row survivors themselves, who dubbed themselves the Death Row 10. They worked with their family members, their mothers, their sisters, and other loved ones who were their ambassadors, who spoke for them on the outside, although they often spoke on their own. And they eventually wedded with the anti-death penalty movement here in Chicago, and that resulted in the commutation of everyone's death sentences, the pardon of 4 Chicago police torture survivors on the basis of their innocence, and ultimately the abolition of the death penalty in the state of Illinois in 2011. There was then a campaign to prosecute police torture. I was very much involved in that, brought the cases to the United Nations. Eventually, that resulted, and we got findings from the UN Committee Against Torture, saying that there was a limited investigation and lack of prosecution of those who were responsible and to bring the perpetrators to justice. That eventually led to John Burge being prosecuted for not the torture itself, because the statute of limitation expired, but perjury and obstruction of justice. And he was convicted. And he was convicted because essentially he lied that he and others engaged in torture, and the jury found against him. But I want to tell you, that was a real hollow victory, right? A lot of people would think that that conviction would mean a stand of justice, but the reality is it didn't meet the material needs of the survivors whatsoever. They could not get any financial compensation. Lawsuits, the statute of limitations prevented that. No place for them to get any psychological counseling, even though they continued to struggle and cope with their PTSD and other mental devastation, as well as their family members. And so that then led, and I know I'm going on long, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. That led to this campaign that started shortly after Burge's conviction, where we started Chicago Torture Justice Memorials. We were following up on a call put out by Black People Against Police Torture for reparations in these cases. And so we initially invited people to submit memorials, speculative memorials, like how would you represent and create a memorial that does justice to the racist violence, but also the resilience and perseverance of the survivors and family members, and the organizing efforts that refuse to take no, for an answer. And eventually what happened is part of that, we did an art exhibit. We got 70 memorials, and I drafted the reparations legislation as a speculative memorial. Never in my wildest imagination think we would file it, let alone launch a campaign. But ultimately, in 2013, we did file that legislation. And eventually, during the mayoral and aldermanic elections, and what I would say is the first tidal wave of the Black Lives Matter movement, Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, we met up and we joined a coalition with We Charge Genocide, Project NIA, and Amnesty International. And we ended up getting that reparations legislation passed in the city of Chicago on May 6th of 2015. So we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary of that legislation passage. And two of the things that came out of that were, one, the Chicago Torture Justice Center. That's a center at 63rd and Woodlawn on the south side of Chicago that provides psychological counseling and wellness services, as well as peer reentry services to all people impacted by police violence. It's the first of its kind in the nation. And so, I'd love for you guys to check out Chicago Torture Justice Center. It does incredible work. It's this great community space. And for others on this call who know, there was shutting down of mental health clinics in the city of Chicago by Mayor Emanuel. And where the Chicago Torture Justice Center sits now is one of those shut down mental health clinics. So it's like we put that back in the people's column, right? And the other thing is that we are still trying to fight for is a memorial. And this has been 10 years in the making. We've now got a promise from the city of Chicago to provide $3 million. We have land at 55th and King in order to build it. And again, we are building it on the south side because that's where the torture survivors wanted it. But we're facing significant financial setbacks due to increasing costs. And so we're still raising money, but we are very hopeful that in the next 6 months that we are going to actually break ground and start building this memorial. And it's a memorial that is a testament to the survivors' resilience and perseverance, but also the decades-long struggles for justice. And I think, right now, it's really important for us to have these conversations around torture, to make these connections, but also to memorialize these struggles, these collective struggles. As we see the authoritarian and fascist administrations wanting to erase and deny all this anti-Black racist history and also demonize anyone who is pro-Palestine or trying to speak the truth around Gaza and Palestine and genocide. We have to memorialize this history, but also the collective struggles for justice, because we know that if we're going to get through this authoritarianism that we are seeing every day, we have to do it together and we have to do it collectively. So I'm sorry I went so long, but I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you, Joey. And thank you so much for your work. Uh, and for your very kind words. You are a leader for so many of us as well. So we really appreciate your taking the time to let folks know about your work. Um, all right, we're going to move along. We have a variety of amazing tzedek members to get to. So our next speaker is Seth Moses. And Seth is a member, as I said, of tzedek Chicago, and is active with Chicago Community Jail Support and is here to speak about the work there.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi Brandt. As everyone has said, can everyone hear me okay? I'm on my headphones. Awesome. It's an honor to be here with so many tzaddikim. I'll take it away. I do have, unfortunately, another commitment, so I'm going to have to get going pretty soon after I talk, but I'm going to put the link to get involved in Chicago Community Jail Support in the chat. And you can also reach out to me directly. I'm going to put my email in the chat. I'm going to be quite busy for the rest of the month, but if you email me, I'll certainly get back to you by July and give you more guidance about how to get involved if you're interested. Okay, so Chicago Community Jail Support is an autonomous volunteer collective that I've been involved with pretty much since it started in the summer and fall of 2020. As many of you probably know, when you are engaging in a protest that is going to result in arrests, it's important to organize jail support for your comrades who get arrested. And what Chicago Community Jail Support grew out of was people organizing jail support for protesters who were arrested during the 2020 uprising. So because, if you remember, the uprising went on for so long, there were arrests happening every day. And so what this turned into was people organizing through group chats 24-hour jail support at various jails throughout the city, but especially Cook County Jail, which is at 27th and California. For those of you who are not from Chicago, Chicago is a city, but it is also inside of a county, which is Cook County, which contains Chicago and most of its suburbs. So Cook County is a lot bigger than Chicago. And all the other jails in the city are city jails, but Cook County Jail is a county jail. Okay. It's also the largest county jail in the country, I believe. Yes. So what happened was we were organizing this 24-hour jail support for protesters. What we realized was that protesters weren't the only ones who needed support being released from jail. Everybody being released from jail needs support. And particularly, this is an issue in Chicago for the following reason. When you get arrested in Cook County, no matter where you are in Cook County, you get booked at the local precinct. And then if they hold you for more than 24 hours, you get transferred to Cook County Jail. This means you could be arrested way out in like a far-flung suburb. No matter what, if you're more than 24 hours, you're in Cook County Jail. When they transfer you to Cook County Jail, they don't transfer your belongings. So that's your phone, wallet, keys, jacket, whatever you had on you. This means that when people are released from Cook County Jail, they don't have a wallet, they don't have a bus card, they don't have a cell phone, they don't have their car keys, they don't have a way to get home. So the main need that Chicago Community Jail Support serves is, well, there's a couple of main needs. The first thing we do, everybody who leaves the jail leaves from the same exit. So we set up a tent outside that exit. We say, hey, how's it going? We have free water and snacks and cigarettes. People are usually like, free cigarettes? No way. And then we start a conversation with them. We ask them, do you have a way to get home? They say no. We offer them to use our cell phones. And we say, do you have a friend or relative you could call? Often they do, and so then they can just kind of sit and chill with us while they're waiting for someone to pick them up. If they don't have someone who can pick them up, or if they can't get in touch with someone, we try to have people with cars to drive them home or to drive them to the precinct to get their stuff and then drive them home. Occasionally, of course, people don't have a place to go. And so then we try to set up short-term motel stays for people who don't have a safe place to go. And we try to connect them with social services as best we can. But again, we're not really a social service organization. We're like an autonomous collection of volunteers. Anyway, so we try to be there 365 days a year in the evenings. People only get released at night because it takes all day and they make it take as long as they can. Something we've observed over the 5 years we've been doing this is that people are getting released later and later in the evening. And so we've had to shift our hours later. We now do 2 shifts. One is 6:30 to 9 p.m. and one is 9 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. So we pack up around 11:30 every night. What else? We're particularly important when it's very hot or very cold outside. Especially in Chicago, it gets very, very cold in the winter. And if you remember what I said, people are getting released without their coats. So one way that we have been getting into some public attention is every winter during the polar vortex, we make a post online every time somebody gets released without a coat, and we say what temperature it is. And that has gotten us some public attention. Another thing that's gotten us public attention is Cook County Jail doesn't consistently have drinkable or clean water. The water is often getting shut off so that people can't bathe. And what they give people to drink is like not enough water to really live on. They also don't give people enough food to really live on. And people are often in Cook County Jail for months and months. So when the water gets shut off, we post about it. We say there's been no water in Cook County, in these divisions of the jail for 4 days, 5 days, no water. And when we post about these things, the polar vortex or the water shutoffs, we get a lot of attention, and we get a lot of people saying like, this is an emergency. What can we do? Who can we call? This is an emergency. And it's frustrating because it's like, well, you can call the mayor if you want to, but you can call the commissioner if you want to, but really the emergency is incarceration, right? Incarceration is an ongoing emergency. And something that I've found frustrating doing this work is we're often like, oh, should we try to get a campaign off the ground to like fix the water in the jail? And we try to do that, but really the capacity we have is to do what's honestly the palliative work of helping people as much as we can as they get out. So I look forward to in the future, I see a future where there's a Chicago organizing campaign around trying to improve some of these conditions. A huge victory we've had is the end of pretrial detention in Illinois, which means that there are fewer people dealing with these conditions. But it's true that just like the event of being in jail is an emergency. It's an emergency every time, and it's always unbearable. I do want to end on a positive note, though, which is that it's really joyful work to experience this. I'm thinking of the text that Virginia brought to us. There's a lot of there's the horror of the thing itself, but there is also the reward of freedom, right? And the people that we talk to who've just gotten out of jail are often in a really good mood because they're so fucking happy to be free. And so we make really great connections with people, and we have really good conversations with people, both other volunteers and people that we're talking to, and also their friends and relatives who are waiting for them. It's a really good place of connection because we're just sitting out there. And it's a wonderful way of like reorganizing space and sociality, I think, of like being able to say, you've been dehumanized in this terrible place, and now we are here as soon as you get out to affirm that you're a person and that you deserve care and love and a listening ear. So that's my pitch. It's a great time. You should volunteer if you want to. Send me an email or go to that website and you can fill out a form and somebody will reach out to you. But it's really soul enriching work. Yeah. And unfortunately, I do have to go, but thank you.
No, Steph, thank you so much. Thanks for being here, for taking the time. It's just amazing to hear about this work. I see, the work is so very different from one another, but I think we can all see some common themes developing. I think for me, especially just the focus on not just the system, but the experience of those in the system and the devastation that occurs existentially by those who are subjected to these carceral oppressive systems. So thank you, everyone who is to speak yet. So our next speaker is Paul Rothschild, a member of Tzedek Chicago. Paul is a formerly incarcerated advocate, organizer, and restorative justice practitioner committed to healing, accountability, and collective liberation. Paul's work focuses on dismantling systems of permanent punishment and creating pathways for repair and reintegration. Paul has led efforts to expand record relief, shift public narratives, and build platforms for directly impacted artists. He joins this panel to share from his lived experience and to stand in solidarity with all those impacted by incarceration, both in the U.S. and globally. Paul, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. What an amazing group. This deeply affirms why I am a member of SEDEC, the fact that this is part of our population. So thank you all for that alignment and for me providing a home for me to find. So, Paul Rothschild, I grew up in Chicago, had a relatively normal life publicly, had some personal issues that spiraled out of control and led to a federal prison sentence, 10-year mandatory minimum. I was lucky in a lot of ways. I was lucky I got a minimum sentence. I could have gotten 30 years. I'm lucky I did not have a direct victim. And I'm lucky that ultimately I found incarceration to be a positively transformative experience, not because of anything at all in the system, not because of any of the programming, but because of the people that I met and the internal work that I did while incarcerated. And now, 5 years to the date from the day I walked out of federal prison. Thank you for scheduling this today. I find myself working as a managing director at the Illinois Coalition to End Permanent Punishments. Permanent punishments are what we describe as they're sometimes called collateral consequences. It's the punishment after the punishment, right? When all your sentences have been completed and the covenant you made with the judge is supposed to be enforced and you're returned back to the world. The reality is that there's a web of thousands of barriers that people with arrest or conviction records face, whether or not they've ever been incarcerated. And I have a lot more I could focus on introductions, but I want to get to the meat of the subject. So maybe we'll peel that onion some other time. I wanted to speak first on the subject of torture in the prison setting itself. There is what we think of as torture as I think of it as kind of the acute torture, right? The immediate instance of torture. And I think there's another version, which is the slow, chronic version that accompanies all forms of incarceration, where the system is intentionally dehumanizing and punishing in every regard, right? The food is used as a punishment, the healthcare is a punishment, right? There is nothing that is part of that system that is not a punishment. And that system is deeply damaging both to the people that are incarcerated and to the people who are inflicting that damage. So I've heard it quoted, I've not researched it, but I've heard it quoted that the profession of correctional officer has the highest suicide rate of any career path in the United States. And if that is in fact true, it does not surprise me because when you think about becoming part of a system that is oppressive and is focused on punishing human beings, we know that that creates damage in the person who inflicts the harm as much as the person who receives it. And in many ways, it's often worse when you're the one inflicting it because you've made that choice daily to continue in those behaviors. So I think that's really critical to think about is that torture is also a long-term chronic um, result of incarceration. And I'm a proud client. Chicago Torture Justice Center invited me to come in for an assessment on mental health. And they have a series of screens that they use to determine if somebody has experienced what is defined as torture. And hooray, I passed that test. So I'm actually really excited that I am a client at Chicago Torture Justice Center, where they have therapists who are deeply steeped in a specific, version of trauma. And I couldn't think of a more competent group of people to serve this population and myself. So I'm about 4 months into having a regular therapist there, and it's amazing. And then I do want to hit just briefly on the subject of Jewish identity and incarceration, which is an incredibly complex. Yeah, Tomas, I feel like I need to respond immediately to that comment. Um, the reason people want to be a prison guard for the most part is because prisons are placed in communities intentionally where they are the one and only number one hiring force in the area. Prisons are essentially a jobs program for rural communities that have lost industries, lost coal mining. And so this is the top job in many areas where there are prisons. But the subject of Jewish identity and incarceration, I went to federal prison, My first prison was in Wisconsin. And literally, my first cellmate was a bald, tattooed white supremacist who looked at my last name. And the first question was, "Oh, are you Jewish?" And from the moment, yeah, Skylar, um, I had to make a choice right there to what I was going to do. And without going deeply into my personal history with Judaism, let's just say I had no problem denying my Judaism in to that person in that cell because I pretty much denied it my whole life. I really was not raised around organized religion, and my exposure to Judaism was primarily alienating when I heard talk. Well, let's okay, we'll save that topic for another time. Let's just say I denied my Judaism, and that was enough for me to survive a couple of weeks in a cell with that person. But throughout my stay, there was always this attribution of me as being Jewish, whether or not I practiced. So, no Hebrew school, no bar mitzvah, didn't speak any Hebrew. And yet, white supremacists who they do control the white population at the very least in prisons, still saw me as Jewish. And why this is so interesting is later on, a few years left in my sentence, I was at a different institution, and someone connected me with a reentry organization, which is faith-based Jewish organization. And they mailed me an assessment form that asked me questions like whether I had a Jewish name, a Hebrew name, whether my parents were Jewish, what their Hebrew names were. And I filled out that form to the best of my ability and got a welcome and congratulations letter and a care package in return. And when I got out, I was connected with a local reentry organization in Chicago that's affiliated with them. But I want to compare that with the experience of the most Jewish person I met in prison. Was a guy who's still there. His name is John Chumley. He had self-converted himself in his 20s while incarcerated. He spoke Hebrew. He prayed 5 times a day. He wore a kippah. He led Jewish services for other Jewish inmates in the prison system. And I mean, he was fluent. He taught himself Hebrew and was fluent in spoken and written Hebrew. And when I showed him my welcome kit, he said, "Wow, like that's really great stuff." And he filled out the same application form and was denied, right? He was not Jewish enough for that organization. And to me, that was a really important distinction about like, what does it mean to be Jewish? And what is that relationship with incarceration? And I don't have answers. These are just open questions. But I think that it's a really important question of identity. And I think that this is where it also ties into the question of Palestinian solidarity and Palestinian human rights, in that when we other people and we label them as somehow not belonging in our group, it is really easy to dehumanize them and justify inhuman behavior towards them. And so when we allow the prison culture of America to persist, we are allowing the same system and the same philosophies that allow the treatment of the Palestinian people today in Israel and so many other places where there are atrocities committed against others. And so the value of SEDEC, of belonging and collective liberation, means the world to me. And the diversity of our population, people who have converted themselves or are just even exploring Judaism, the broadness of the base of our welcome is critically important to me. And I will end on just one comment where I'm going to argue a little bit against the quote that we're using, that the prisoner cannot free themselves from prison. And I know I'm speaking here metaphysically, not physically, but in the end, only the prisoner can free themselves from prison metaphysically. And we are all in prisons, whether they are physical or not. And it is only ourselves that can identify those and work to free ourselves from them. And doing that without community is almost impossible. So that's where I really think that having community is critical, even in prison, to being able to do that hard work internally to identify and free ourselves. Thank you.
Oh, Paul, thank you so much. Wow, you raised so many powerful and important questions for us to and challenges for us to consider. All right. think we should maybe take a few beats. We hear such powerful testimonies with each speaker before moving on. Okay, I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, who's also a co-organizer of this program, Maya Shenwar, who is a member of Tzedek Chicago. And let's see, what else is Maya? What else can I say about Maya? An author, an editor, and an organizer focused on incarceration. Maya is the director of the Truth Out Center for Grassroots Journalism and is a member of Chicago-based abolitionist group Love and Protect, and is the co-founder of the Chicago Community Bond Fund. And with that, take it away, Maya.
Thanks, Brand. I'm really, really glad to be here. I love that Tzedek is doing this program. Thank you, Virginia, for suggesting it. I love that Tzedek is recognizing that this work against incarceration and policing and torture is an integral part of any liberation work. And I think that's especially important to remember right now when we're increasingly living under fascism, and the way that fascism is enforced is the carceral state, is through prisons and policing. And so all of us, I think, have a collective responsibility, especially right now, to be thinking about it. And I don't think it's a coincidence either that so many of us here who came to Tzedek due to our opposition to the collective punishment of the Palestinian people are also engaged in this anti-carceral work here in the US too. And these things are so, so interconnected. And I'm excited to think with everyone about what could come out of these conversations in terms of how we can take action together as Tzedek. But I'm a member of Love and Protect. That's what I'm talking about today. And Love and Protect is a Chicago-based volunteer collective that supports women, trans people, and non-binary people of color who've experienced both interpersonal violence and state violence. So that intersection. And very often, these are survivors who've been incarcerated for defending themselves against gender-based violence. And Love and Protect began 12 years ago as the Chicago Alliance to Free Marissa Alexander. And Marissa Alexander is a Black mother of 3. She lived in Jacksonville, Florida, and she was facing 20 years in prison for defending herself in a violent attack from her estranged husband. She personally did not harm anyone herself, although some survivors who we support did harm people. Marissa was freed after a lot of organizing around the country. There was just this groundswell of support thanks to the incredible leadership of a lot of organizers, including Miriam Kaba. And so Marissa was freed, and that organizing, she took a plea deal and eventually was off electronic monitoring. But that organizing planted a seed, and it raised awareness of the fact that Marissa was just one of many, many people, mostly Black and Indigenous women and trans and non-binary people who are incarcerated for defending their lives against gender-based violence. So Love and Protect expanded its work to focus on criminalized survivors more broadly. So why do we focus on supporting criminalized survivors in particular? I want to mention that criminalized survivors are often dismissed. And this is something that I think has been a common theme, kind of disposing of people, disregarding their humanity. Criminalized survivors are often dismissed as imperfect victims because they defended themselves. They would have been perfect victims if they died. they used the means that they had to use to stay alive. And these criminalized survivors are particularly dismissed and disposed of this way if they are Black, trans, disabled, working class, because the criminalization system is so grounded in white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, ableism, classism. And very often, I think race and class and gender and sexuality help dictate who the system allows to be considered a victim and who's seen as inherently guilty. And I think this in particular intersects deeply with issues around Palestine. Think about who's allowed to be considered a victim and who's not. Another reason that Love and Protect focuses on criminalized survivors is that prison is itself violence. And in a sense, every single person who's ever been incarcerated is a survivor. The very act of authorities capturing and caging a human being is violence. The very act of forcing someone to comply with a strip search, which is just basic protocol, that's sexual violence. The very act of isolating someone in solitary confinement with no access to other people for days or months or years at a time, that extreme deprivation of bodily autonomy is violence, it's torture. And so at Love and Protect, we recognize that the system of policing and incarceration inflicts gender-based violence, just as people can inflict violence on each other. So what do we do in Love and Protect? For one thing, most of the survivors that Love and Protect is supporting and collaborating with are still incarcerated. So part of what we do is we support efforts to get them free. We support their clemency petitions. We go to their post-conviction hearings to urge the Prison Review Board to free them. Some of the survivors we support have been charged but haven't been convicted yet. And so we push to get their charges dropped so they won't go to prison. And we do this work in collaboration with other groups around the city and the state. And then at the same time, while they are in prison and jail, we're also prioritizing mutual aid to support their survival. So we write letters to them, we develop relationships, and this kind of emotional support is a form of safety in itself. Obviously, safety in terms of just the mental health and human connection component of it, because prison is inherently isolating. But also when authorities see incarcerated people getting mail, they know they have advocates on the outside, so they're less likely to target them. We also raise money so that we can add funds every month to each survivor's commissary account. Commissary is like the store in prison, so that they can buy food, toothpaste, tampons and pads, pens, paper, just other basic necessities that you should not have to pay for, but you do. And we've also raised some funds to support survivors once they're released from prison and are needing just basic things like housing and groceries. And I think this is significant that when we ask survivors who are returning from prison what they need to feel safe, I don't think any of them have ever said, oh, I need the police. Like that's what I'm looking for to feel safe. They usually say housing. So we give them a bit of no strings attached money to get what they need. So at Love and Protect, we're doing this advocacy and mutual aid to support survivors in meeting their needs as they articulate them. And I want to mention that the inspiration for this comes from their resistance. So when we're talking about like, oh, like I've had people kind of interact with Love and Protect for the first time and say, wow, it's so unique that you're supporting people who, committed violent acts, instead of recognizing like, we're actually inspired by their example of resistance and their example of actually, defending their lives and taking action in the ways that they did. So I think that's also maybe something for us to grapple with as we talk about all these interconnected issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Wow. You know, I just finished a book by Mohammed El-Kurd called Perfect Victims. I'm sure many of you have read it, and much of what's being shared reminds me so much of the Palestinian experience. And I'm really appreciating that our speaker is connecting those dots to the actual work that they do. So thank you, Maya. Nikki Morris is our next speaker. Nikki, let me introduce Nikki to you. Nikki is a Tzedek Chicago member and is an organizer with the Community Hotline for Incarcerated People in Southern Florida, and also executive producer of the album Bending the Bars, and an associate professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. So welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. I will keep this brief and end with a song from the album that was released yesterday. As Rabbi Rosen said, I was working with the Community Hotline for Incarcerated People, which, like Seth's organization, is an autonomous collective. And we were taking calls from people incarcerated in Broward County jails, which are horrific. And people were dealing with a lot of medical neglect. They were reporting all of the difficulties they were facing. And they would also, at the end of calls, saying, I just wrote this beat. I have a new hook. Like, can I share it with you? And so we recognized that there was this incredible store of artistry. That's obviously not unusual. And we were in a position to do something with it because as a professor, I was able to get grant money for media production. And there has been, it's been difficult to get grant money for other things that might be in some ways more important, more urgent. And yet I wanted to see, how could we use that access to resources to do something that went beyond just raising awareness, or kind of exposing people to the problems with prisons and jails, because I think that can be a strategy with diminishing returns. So I'm going to briefly share in the chat a few things about the album called Bending the Bars. There's a review in Truth Out. Thank you, Maya and Truth Out, for having the opportunity to share leftist content. And I will also flag that one of the resources that we have on our link tree is the opportunity to send fan mail to the artists. And so even though we didn't get to do letter writing tonight, if you do listen to the album, please consider sending a short note to one of the artists. It makes a huge difference to folks inside. My brief moment of connecting this to Palestine is that our executive producer, Gary Field, who's incarcerated and has been incarcerated for about 20 years, was the person who supported me the most, probably when I was being investigated for my Palestine solidarity work. He understood, those connections between carcerality and Palestine. And also he understood, because he was doing so many things that were so much riskier and braver than me in organizing 50-some people to submit demos to an album while he was inside. Like, he knew what it was like to take risks and to have courage, and he was so generous to support me with that. And then we ended up in a situation where some of our artists had been incarcerated for so long, their families had no access to cameras and pictures of them. So all we had was their mugshots, which we did not want to use for publicity. So I was able to connect with an artist in North Gaza, and this spring, she worked on creating illustrated portraits of these two men. They don't have photographs. She obviously was in northern Gaza during, this horrifying time, and being able to kind of create that connection for all of them was a really powerful moment. With that, I would love to, end in a traditional Tzedek way with a song, and this is by Gary Field, our executive producer, and I think it really speaks to both the text study and what all of these other incredible panelists have said.
Start tearing down walls and building bridges, finding a way to make things right. When a man falls, he needs those bridges out of the darkness into light. Won't you lift your hands up? Won't you raise your voice? Help someone to stand up. Silence is a choice.
Well, injustice thrives on silence, so it's time to make a choice. Folks need your help and guidance, so it's time to raise your voice. How long will you look the other way with folks falling through the cracks? Folks barely surviving day to day while you simply turn your backs. If we're the richest country in the world, could someone please explain to me why the homeless rate seems to escalate and there's no war on poverty? Now, for those who choose to have penthouse views, I don't begrudge them or envy their plan. It's the other part that breaks my heart. The homeless eating out of garbage cans.
Start tearing down walls and building bridges, finding a way to make things right. When a man falls, he needs those bridges, brighter days to follow night. Won't you lift your hands up? Won't you raise your voice? Help someone to stand up. Silence is a choice.
Well, they've criminalized mental illness, then treat addiction as a crime. How long do you think until this moves from the shadows to prime time? You couldn't build prisons fast enough with those razor wire fences. Stop moral decline with a handcuff. It's time we all came to our senses.
'Cause all of us are better than worse things that we have done. But there's a scarlet letter, a ball and chain that weighs a ton.
Well, it's a felony conviction, like a stain or an affliction that keeps folks down when their time is done. That felony conviction can be seen as the new Jim Crow. It's a limiting restriction that strikes harder than a blow. Now, how can a man be expected to rise when he has to check that box? Jobs taken? That's no surprise. Now go ahead and kick rocks. Go ahead and kick rocks.
Start tearing down walls and building bridges, finding a way to make things right. When a man falls, he needs those bridges out of the darkness into light. Won't you lift your hands up? Won't you raise your voice? Help someone to stand up. Silence is a choice. Start tearing down walls and building bridges, finding a way to make things right. When a man falls, he needs those bridges out of the darkness into light. Won't you lift your hands up? Won't you raise your voice? Help someone to stand up. Silence is a choice. Yes, silence is a choice.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Wow. Thank you, Nikki. Oh, wow. What a great way to close it out. Oh, the perfect way to conclude our teachings from our speakers. And thank you all so much for sharing your work and sharing your lives and sharing these deep sacred lessons with us. So I'm going to turn things back over to Virginia. Virginia, you've heard from Virginia, but you haven't been properly introduced to Virginia. So I will introduce Virginia to you. is a member of Tzedek Chicago, a Chicago native and longtime resident of Washington, D.C. She is active with national and regional advocacy on carceral issues and inclusive Jewish spiritual support for incarcerated people. And Virginia, just echoing the appreciation for your inspiration for this program.
Well, thank you very much. But one of the things that I've learned only recently is that the UN and other people who are concerned about this actually do now sort of declare that being on death row is its own form of torture apart from actually execution and the solitary confinement that goes along with it, that the situation of being condemned to death and watching your neighbors be taken away is its own horrible thing. And my Havruta has given me permission to share some of the things that he's told me. And Ronnie was in the cell next door to Anthony Wainwright when, in fact, like trying to share part of a burrito with him when Anthony said, "Oh, they're coming." And Ronnie discovered that the man in the next cell that he's known for decades was being taken from his regular confinement to death watch because, in fact, Anthony was executed on Tuesday night. So for the last month, they're taken away from the people they've been in some community with, and the horrors of this whole situation are like its own weird, desperate thing. And we could have a whole program on that. We could have a whole program on everything anybody shared tonight. And I do want to leave a little, well, there's not much time, but a little time for a few comments. And I want to share one, well, I guess I should say I was connected with Ronnie through the organization called Matir Asarim, which is the Jewish Care Network for Incarcerated People. And there's links to that in the materials that I shared. They address some of the issues that Paul raised about people who maybe aren't accepted by Aleph, which is run by a Chabad kind of organization. They're either not accepted by that organization because they're not Jewish enough, or those resources don't suit them because they're not inclusive resources or resources that speak to everybody's Jewish spirituality. So Matira Sarim is a tiny, tiny little group trying to kind of fill some of that need. There's also a piece of writing called Fringe Prayer for June 12th. And I was going to explain what it is, but there just isn't time for, like, I don't want to take any more time. So read it. We can talk about it at some other time. And the idea is that, as many people have noted, our attempts to correspond with and make friends with people who are living behind bars or who have been incarcerated extend our community. And the advertisement for tonight was that we were going to talk about what is Jewish responsibility. And I don't think that the Jewish community is so good at acknowledging how many Jews inside need support and how much Jews are just not paying attention to these issues. So with that, there's like 8 minutes left. Somehow seems like a nice round number. So I will ask Brant, do you want to start with a closing, or should we try to get a few comments in here? We are supposed to be ending at a half hour.
If there are people, I think we have time for a few comments or questions. If there's anybody who'd like to help kick off a conversation. All right. Well, I know we've thrown a lot at you, and again, I want to thank Virginia and Maya and all of the speakers we heard from this evening. I have a strong feeling that this is really priming the pump for something to continue out of. I don't think any of us want this to be a one-off, and there's been so much shared and so many ideas, really about recognizing the Tselem Elohim, the divine image in all people, and connecting with that image, particularly for those who are incarcerated, and lifting up that image for those who are being dehumanized. So there's a blessing. Why don't we do this? I've been thinking of various good ways to end our conversation this evening.
Before you close out, Nikki did raise their hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nikki, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add briefly one thing that I had in my notes, but I had skipped, and it is relevant to what Paul raised and what was discussed in the chat. My answer to the question of why did I get into this work, for a long time I didn't really share it because I didn't know how to talk about it. I got involved with prison abolition because when I was very young, I met a man and married him who had been a corrections officer. And as I was kind of processing that relationship and coming out, I needed to learn more about, what was the impact of being a corrections officer on this man who grew up in rural Kansas, where it was the only job available, and then how that had impacted me. And I ended up in Black and Pink Chicago seeking answers. And, that got me into abolitionism. And the thing that I struggled with for a long time is I never want to seem to be suggesting that I am system impacted in the way that someone like Paul, who has been, directly tortured by the system, has been system impacted. But over time, I realized that by denying that I am system impacted, I am removing myself from the position of solidarity that I want to do this work from. And that the more that I think we all name that, though it is, not comparable if you have never been incarcerated, as Miriam Kaba says, we live in a prison culture. How can any of us not be system impacted? And if we come from that place of knowing how this impacts us, then I think that is a place where we can be in true solidarity with folks who are the most severely impacted. So that's why I do this work, and that's something I wanted to just share. Thank you for giving me the moment to do that.
Thank you, Nikki. Absolutely. I mean, I think we're all learning on so many levels about what it means to be system impacted, and living with, really grappling with in a direct way from a place of solidarity, the reality of carceral systems. And so, as I said, I think this is the beginning of something at SEDEC. So stay tuned. We all know who you are, and we know the ones who didn't join us, but we're interested in joining us this evening. So one way or another, we'll be in touch. And what I would like to do is just close with this blessing. And it's a self-explanatory blessing. I think you'll understand it. And as I say these words, when I invoke the blessing of the divine, just based on what we have heard tonight, I just want to suggest that we also understand and connect with the way the divine works through the efforts of all of us. So I'll say the blessing, and then when I'm done, I want everyone to unmute and say Amen. All right. Baruch atah Adonai matir asurim. Blessed is the one who liberates the captive. And let us say,
Amen.
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 Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.